Hello, I'm Paul Pearson. I'm the editor and publisher of Greenmantle magazine. I'm here to give you a brief history of the magazine and its connections with the Centre for Pagan Studies and the Doreen Valiente Foundation. To begin with, Greenmantle began in 1993 and it came about by accident. My partner at the time, Rowan Wolfe, and myself were attending a festival called the Earth Spirit Festival in Sussex. And one of the things that was notable about the event was that it was absolutely devastated by gale force winds, and many of the dealers and tables there were actually blown away. One person whose table was blown away was Tam Campbell, who was promoting Pagan Link at the time. He came to our table and asked if we would be kind enough to put his literature on the table for people to take. We were quite happy to do so. But what happened was a lot of people came to our table and began asking about what was going on in the Brighton area with regards to paganism. We said we didn't know, we weren't anything to do with this literature, but we would pass on their details to Tam and he could get back to them. So we collected a list of people's names and addresses and contact details. But Tam never reappeared. We never saw him again, at the festival at least. And so we took the list home with us and decided not to let these people down, but we decided that we would create a little 2-page newsletter to find out what was happening in the pagan scene in Brighton. Unfortunately, we didn't actually know what was happening in Brighton. So I contacted the local pagan fed agents, which was Fran and Rob Hall, and they came over to see us, and they were lovely people, and they sort of gave us all the information about what was going on in the region with regards to paganism. And so we started doing it. And as the newsletter started progressing, it got bigger because we decided we wanted to put a bit more stuff in. And so we decided it was going to be a little one-off magazine, a little newsletter for local people. But before the first issue was even finished, we actually had inquiries from places as far afield as Australia asking about our magazine, which wasn't technically really a magazine at the time. So we produced the first issue and we brought it out towards the end of the year, and it got a moderate response. We were quite happy, so much so in fact that we decided that we would continue, and it grew very quickly because at the time I was working with Incubus Succubus, working on a musical which I'd written some years ago, and they in turn put me in touch with a chap called Steve Payne, who was the chief executive of Pagan Media Limited and leader of the rock band Legend. And he got on board and was really promoting us, and we were promoting him. And by our second issue, we were announcing that we had our very first event, which was a Yule party in Bryden held at the Concord Club, featuring the bands Legend and Seventh Wave. It wasn't a great success, only about a dozen or so people actually attended, but it was good fun and it gave us a start. We were getting known and Greenmantle began to grow. With the magazine being established now, quite by accident, it continued to grow. And with Steve Payne, we were able to give out our free gift, which was a record with Incubus Succubus and Legend, courtesy of Pagan Media Limited. And we were getting to know quite a lot of the local community, especially through Fran and Rob. And it's through Fran and Rob that we met John Bell and Payne. Now, Fran and Rob used to run a weekend event called the Broomstick Rally, which is held at Plumpton Green in Sussex. They were a great time, very, very, how can I put it, anarchic in a way. Very, very anarchic. And it was there that I met John Bell and Payne, and he really got on with us. He loved the magazine, and we both had very similar ideas about how paganism should be presented to the public and what sort of image it should have. And so we continued being friends for quite some time. The magazine, in the meantime, carried on, and it became harder and harder to actually get issues out. The simple reason being the technology wasn't there to do it. Unlike today, where we have computers and the internet and printers and so on and so forth, all we had was a word processor and a dot matrix printer. So we'd have to type in the articles when we got them, and then cut them and paste them onto another piece of paper to mix with the artwork and match the artwork. And so it became very, very tiresome, especially when the contributors had to write their articles and contributions and send them through the actual Royal Mail system. And then we'd have to copy type and rearrange and edit, and it became very tedious and very hard work. And it was very difficult to get hold of actual contributors. And we started getting very disheartened by this until the technology appeared when we got our first Apple Mac computer, and we were able to lay out the magazine on a computer screen, which is when we went to the A5 format. And this was a great thing for us. Although we were still having difficulty with the contributors, because not everybody was on the internet at that point, it was a very new thing, we were still able to get it out much easier, and we could drop and drag stuff into the issue and make it work, which it did. And we became even more widespread, especially with events like A Culture happening in Brighton, where we had tables and we met other people who actually got involved with us and actually ended up writing for people like Ramsay Dukes, for example, would eventually write for the magazine. Amado Crowley was another one who decided to contribute also. But it was still a case of finding the contributors. And although we'd had some name contributors like Michael Howard from the Cauldron, it was still difficult to get the content. And luckily we came across a friend called Kenny Johnson. Now, Kenny Johnson was a journalist and professional writer. He'd published a few books, and one of his books, which I'll come back to later, was called The Fulcanelli Phenomenon, which is something of a seminal book on the subject of Fulcanelli and alchemy. And he was quite a prolific writer, and we had lots of stuff from him. So much, in fact, that it was almost becoming the Kenny Johnson magazine. He would write lots of all different things, all different subjects, and he was wonderful. But it was lacking that input from other people, which is what we so dearly wanted. And then around about 96, 97, we started to wind down a little bit. It was getting hard, and we was desperately trying to find writers. And eventually, by about 2006, it was failing, basically. And it looked like Greenmantle was doomed to be shelved. By this time, Rowan Wolfe and myself had parted company, and I was with Tallis. And in 2009, we decided we'd play with the idea of resurrecting Greenmantle in a new format, a new sort of style. And we decided first to create a Facebook page, test the water, and see how many people were interested. We were quite stunned when so many people sort of said, "Oh yes, bring back Greenmantle, we'd love to see it again." Tallis Kimberley sort of said, "Oh yes, and if you do something, I'd be happy to come and sing for you." And so it was decided Greenmantle would return, and we began working on an issue. We had a new layout artist called Caroline, and she did a great job on it. And we relaunched it in 2010 with a free DVD on the cover of the film Hexen, and we had a launch party. We arranged this launch party at a pub called the Farm Tavern in Hove. And on the Facebook page that we made for the event, there was a little notification saying that John Payne was going to be there, which I thought was strangely odd because he lived in Spain. I didn't really imagine him wanting to travel all the way from Spain to Brighton just for an evening. But as I arrived at the pub, he was indeed there. And he was over in England to promote a book, which was a reprint of Where Witchcraft Lives by Doreen Valiente. And he came and he gave a talk at the event, which was uncalled for. He just did it out of the kindness of his heart, because as he said in the video, which will be able to be seen here shortly, the Greenmantle was always his favourite magazine. And the evening was a great success. Talis Kimberley sang for us. Ralph Harvey came along, and there was a great evening had by all. And it was all going swimmingly well until a year or so later, in 2011, I fell desperately ill. I was very close to death. And one of the people who came to visit me whilst I was in hospital in Brighton was John Payne and his wife Julie. I never understood why they would come all that way just to see me in hospital. But when I'd recovered the next year, John asked me if I'd like to be part of a project that he was doing. And the project he was doing and working on in Brighton, and he was coming over for this reason, was a blue plaque for Doreen Valiente at her home, her last home in Tyson Place, Brighton. I said we would be happy. Talis and I decided that we would do it, and we would be the boots on the ground. We would coordinate with the council, and we would coordinate with the housing, the Residents Association at Tyson Place, who were wonderful. There's a lady there called Annie, who's quite a character, and we had a lot of fun with Annie. Sadly, she died a few years ago, but it was a lovely time we had, and we managed to pull it together and get something arranged for this blue plaque to happen. But John wanted more than that. He wanted it to coincide with the 20th anniversary of Greenmantle. So we worked out a programme which worked splendidly. It started off at the centre of Brighton, near Brighton Pavilion, and a parade which led up to Tyson Place, where the unveiling of the blue plaque was taking place. There was live music, there was Pentacle drummers were there, and all people, celebrities from the pagan world were about, John Payne and various others. And then everyone moved on to the Green Door store where we were having our celebration, which included, again, Talis Kimberley and various other musicians, Matthew Callow. And it was a great night by all. There was Morris dancers, there was tables, there was much merriment, and it was one of the best days you could hope for. And it went for both of us. It was a success for both Greenmantle and for the Doreen Valiente Foundation with their unveiling of the blue plaque. We wanted to do more, and in fact we did. John and Julie and Centre for Pagan Studies had a series of events in London at Conway Hall. They had a day for Gerald, they had a day for Doreen Valiente, and at this particular time, they were having a day for Professor Ronald Hutton. And we volunteered to do a special issue of Greenmantle, which would also serve as a programme book for the event. So we did that, and it was supposed to be a stepping stone to another idea we had, which was giving a free subscription to people who joined the Doreen Valiente Foundation. Unfortunately, due to the overlap of subscription services that we offered, it wasn't practical to actually carry it on. But it was a good idea at the time, and it just didn't quite work. And we always wanted to do work with Centre for Pagan Studies. We never actually had a project that we could really get our teeth into. Now, we were invited in 2016 to go and visit John and Julie in Spain. I'd recently seen John at a meeting. He was a member of the Pagan and Heathen Symposium, and I was invited to be a member as well. And I'd seen him shortly before this, and he was talking about something that he had plans for. And he invited us over to Spain, and the event he was talking about was an exhibition at Preston Manor, which would feature much of the collection of the Doreen Valiente collection, and it would be a stepping stone to a permanent exhibition about Doreen Valiente and witchcraft in general. Sadly, a week before we were due to fly to Spain, I received a phone call from Ashley Mortimer telling me that John had died. Now, I was totally devastated by this because it came as a shock. I knew John hadn't been well, but I never realised how serious he was with regards to his illness. We did go to Spain to console Julie, and shortly after that I was honoured, greatly honoured, to speak at John's funeral and to be there for the opening of the Preston Manor exhibition. And the sheer tragedy of that was, at the time John died, he was actually physically working on building cabinets for some of the displays to go in the exhibition. And the tragedy is, he never saw it in the slightest. And what was supposed to be a appreciation and an honouring of Doreen Valiente quickly turned into more of an appreciation and a memorial for John Ballantyne. And Debbie Lewis, who's a wonderful artist who's worked with us many times, did a beautiful portrait which hung in the doorway of the exhibition. This is the portrait which we use as a cover as well. And it was an honour to work with the man. And it was very sad to see him go on a very tragic occasion, but the show must go on, as John would always say. And thus we did. John's passing was a very sad time, but it also had a great effect on us because we followed his example of doing the work. His main goal was to do the work, and we want to do the same. We want to use that focus that he had. And so with him in mind, we continued the magazine, and fiercely, in some ways, wanted to make it better and try and improve it as much as we could. And we couldn't do it on our own. We had many other people who worked with us. We did, of course, have our artists. We had Debbie Lewis, for example, who did the pictures that you see behind me here of my High Priestess and John, and who did the wonderful portrait which featured at the exhibition at Preston Manor in Brighton. But Rowan Wolfe is probably our most prolific artist. Her artwork has appeared in every single issue of Greenmantle, and for much of the time most of the covers were done by her as well. So she has a huge and she was not only an artist, but she was also a co-editor as well, and a layout artist for us. Caroline, who's with us for a short period, about 5 or 6 issues with the relaunch, did a stunning job in making the magazine look so professional, too professional for us really. She did a wonderful, wonderful job. Then we took it all in-house, which is how we are now. But we still have people like Michelle Maiden doing covers for us, and we've had Mark Potts in the past and so forth. And of course we have our editorial team, which at this moment is Talis Harrell. She's a great copy editor, and she does a lot of great work and a lot of great writing. In fact, we recently released a special edition a booklet of a series of her articles about proto-pagans, which looks at some of the inspirations that led to neo-paganism as we know it today. But there are also people outside the magazine who don't really get much of an appreciation, and they should do. Talis Kimberley, for one, a wonderful singer-songwriter who's worked with Greenmantle from the very beginning. One of our first reviews was a review of her Pagan Angel cassette at the time. And she's played with us many times. She played once in my garden for my birthday at one point. And she played at several Greenmantle events, small events that we had in pubs in Brighton and around the place. And in fact, one of our last gigs in Brighton was a Beltane celebration, which featured Paul and Tallis singing on a double bill. Paul and Tallis being Paul Mitchell and Tallis Kimberley, rather than Paul Pearson and Tallis Harrell. So she's always been there as Tallis. And one of our first groups that we had for an event was Legend, led by the wonderful Steve Payne. Now, Steve and Tallis also have a little bit of history together, and some years ago they produced a collaboration of music between Legend and Tallis, and the music was never actually released. The recordings were made, but it was never actually released, and they managed to sort of get it together and allowed us to reproduce these songs and give them away free with the magazine. And it was quite an astonishing mini album between them. It was a great collaboration, and so we're very proud and privileged to have that. And Tallis also produced a single, small LP, CD, called Green Places, which is very special to me personally, for reasons I'm not going to go into right here. But it was a very special recording. Then, of course, we have people like our suppliers. We had Treadwell's and Atlantis Books and the Green Man, the Gatekeeper. These have all been very supportive people, not just with the magazine, but with our other stuff too. Which brings us to further examples of our work, which we have expanded upon. Again, a lot of this comes from John, which is The Mountain and Stream, which is our first book, and that did very, very well. We sold out of it, and if you're lucky, you may find one or two on Amazon, but that's about it. And we had our 25th anniversary, which astonished us. I couldn't believe how long we've been going. And our next project is a book called The Immortals, and it's basically an expanded and annotated version of the Fulcanelli phenomenon by Kenneth Johnson. Now, Kenneth, as I said earlier, was a major contributor to the magazine when it first went to its A5 format. And he was a very talented and very prolific writer. And sadly, he died some years ago, and he left us his literary estate. And part of that estate, there's lots we have yet to sort of go through, but one of the things that he left was a book which is almost entirely finished, called The Immortals, and it's Fulcanelli, Master Alchemist, and the Art of Allegory. And we saw this book. Tallis looked at this book and she said, "This book is a brand new book. It's pretty much a rehash of his first book, but it's much more detailed, and it's ready to go." And so we have been busy over recent months getting that prepared for publication, and we've been getting some great help from Tracy Swain. Now, Tracy did the layout for our Mountain and the Stream book, and she's been a great help in many ways. She's worked with Steve Payne and various other things, and produced some books of her own. And she's also been a great help. And these people have all come together to make Greenmantle something special. And it's always been special to me, so it's always been sort of my child in a way. But it's there now, and it's a part of my life, which is never going to go away. And so for all these people, I have to say a big thank you for making Greenmantle what it is today. As I mentioned before, John was a very big part of Greenmantle in many ways. And, you know, a lot of his heart and his spirit is still there in Greenmantle. Whenever you read an issue of Greenmantle, somewhere in there is a little spark of John, the one that tells us to carry on and keep going. Because John was a showman, and his philosophy was the show must go on. And that's something that has been carrying on with the Centre for Pagan Studies and ourselves, and is something that's very special for us. And I agree, the show must go on. We look forward to it. Now back to the rest of today's stuff.